The first two lessons for this week focused on the supporting biblical evidence for the moral status of the embryo, its humanity and full personhood, and from its very beginning at fertilization to its natural end. It has intrinsic or inherent value. It is also of equal value to all human life, regardless of its quality, social standing, or wantedness. In this lesson, we're going to explore the secular perspectives of this topic. This lesson will focus on four specific areas of concern. The first concern is to review embryonic biology. We will then briefly touch on the pertinent contemporary social and medical issues relating to the moral status of the embryo. We will also briefly touch on the problems of consistency in our approach to these issues, both in practice and in perception. Finally, we will look at something called the precautionary principle, and how that affects the ever-expanding nature of mankind's research capabilities, and how it affects the moral status of the embryo today and anticipates some of the challenges that lie ahead. Critical to understanding the secular perception on the moral status of the embryo is to have at least a rudimentary understanding of embryonic biology. I thought about creating multiple slides with descriptive narration, but in this regard I would be recreating the wheel. At embryology.ch you will find a superior explanation of embryonic biology. Click on the hyperlink or enter www.embryology.ch into your browser address bar. Select Embryogenesis and review sections 4 through 10, which cover from fertilization through fetal membranes and placenta. You can certainly look at the other sections. It might be just valuable to give you a well-rounded understanding of the topic. The site is complete, very complete, and easy to follow. Go ahead for your own learning and take some of the quizzes as well. You know, they've got some quizzes. I played around with them. I like them. It just kind of is your own check on making sure you're following what's being said. Reviewing embryonic biology on this site will give you the background information you're going to need for this course, because when they talk about various stages of embryonic development, we've already established that from its very beginning, primarily when the nuclei connect, that we have life, and what goes on in the debates, whether we're talking hormonal birth control, we're talking stem cell research, we're talking about selective abortions, in vitro fertilization, and so forth. All of that becomes later in the stage, beyond the point of its fertilization. So regardless of the way the industry wants to divide the beginning of life, we recognize it beginning at fertilization, but it's good to have a knowledge of some of the other terms that are being used. Now, in this course on bioethics and biotechnology, we will lean on this foundation we have laid on the moral status of the embryo under a number of different subheadings, such as stem cell research, cloning, and so forth. Three topics that are not on the syllabus, but which are directly affected by the moral status of the embryo, are abortion, birth control, and art, or artificial reproductive technology, which would include such considerations as in vitro fertilization, surrogate parenting, and the cryopreservation of embryos. I will devote only a few slides to each of these subtopics to give you a flavor of some of the embryonic issues with each. On January 22, 1973, the U.S. Supreme Court legalized a woman's right to procure an abortion at any time throughout the pregnancy. Shortly after that ruling, members of Congress proposed a variety of amendments to the U.S. Constitution designed to grant some protection to the unborn life. Over a 16-month period, beginning in March of 1974, hearings were held before the Subcommittee on Constitutional Amendments of the Committee of the Judiciary of the United States Senate of the 93rd Congress to discuss 6 different human life amendments. Beginning in February 1976, comparable hearings were held before the appropriate House of Representatives subcommittee to consider approximately 50 bills relating to the protection of unborn life in the light of legalized abortion. Those hearings produced nearly 5,000 pages of transcripts and supporting material discussing the social, moral, judicial, biological, and theological perspectives on the issue of abortion. Some who provided testimony argued that the Supreme Court was correct in that there was no consensus on when life begins. The vast majority of medical experts, however, agreed that life begins at fertilization. Despite prodding by committee members, supporters of abortion rights would not acknowledge that life exists at conception, but continued to beat the drum of protecting the autonomous right of a woman to do with her own body as she sees fit. This really was the argument in Roe v. Wade, was whether a woman has control over her body and the privacy to make decisions regarding it. This pattern of denial about the humanity of the unborn child was shattered in 1995 when Naomi Wolf, a high-profile feminist, abortion rights advocate, and a former advisor to the Al Gore presidential campaign on women's issues, penned an article for the October 16, 1995 issue of the New Republic in which she called for an honest appraisal of what abortion is, namely the death of a human life. Her point was that true feminism involves honesty in this matter, so that women can mourn the loss of their child and move on with their lives. And she made that point, by stating the death of a fetus is a real death. Now, her statements were widely controversial, especially among the pro-abortion community. They did not think society was ready to hear that candor, but that proved not to be a problem. While Naomi Wolf's candor was met with substantial alarm among abortion rights advocates, there was no such backlash 13 years later, when academic and social critic Camille Paglia wrote an article for the September 10, 2008 online issue of The Salon, in which she came right out and called abortion murder, and then argued for the continued legalization of abortion rights. She said, "I've always frankly admitted that abortion is murder, the extermination of the powerless by the powerful." But if you move on down the quote, she says, "The state, in my view, has no authority whatever to interview in the biological processes of any woman's body." And so there you've got an acknowledgement that in abortion we're killing, we're taking life. But that's not the issue. That's not the point that people are arguing. Marking the 40th anniversary of legalized abortion, writer Mary Elizabeth Williams provided an article for The Salon in which verbalized the essence of abortion rights, when she argued that all life is not equal. Advocates for abortion rights kept beating the drum that a right to privacy trumped the rights of a dependent life. While we could take a detour and talk about the slippery slope nature of this argument, suffice it to say this mentality has been applied to human life at various stages. We'll explore the reality in depth under our discussion on eugenics. But that whole premise that all human life is not equal is extremely serious one to consider, because that argumentation is used to justify a utilitarian approach to human life. Again, I'm going to get into this in much greater depth under the topic of eugenics. What has arisen from legalized abortion is a veneration of maternal rights. In the 1976 Supreme Court case of Planned Parenthood v. Danforth, the court ruled that a pregnant woman did not need permission of her parents or the baby's father in order to procure an abortion. In instances where accidents occurred and an unborn baby is killed, apart from the mother's wishes, she can actually sue for damages. This has always troubled a lot of well-meaning and well-intentioned Christians, and yet this is consistent with pro-abortion mentality. This is all a question about maternal rights, and you cannot force her to have a child that she doesn't want, nor can you take a child from her that she does want. As the rights of the mother are codified in subsequent court rulings, so also do the rights of an unborn child at its smallest stage diminish both legally and in the apparent apathy of the general public. For an example, in October of 2006, actor Michael J. Fox was interviewed by news anchor Katie Couric for CBS Evening News. Michael had been promoting the work of his foundation, formed to do Parkinson's disease research. He had been accused by a conservative radio talk host of exaggerating his tremors, his Parkinson's tremors, to sell his cause. Take a moment and watch the YouTube clip that I've indicated up there in that URL, and take special notice between the 3rd and the 5th minutes of the video, and listen to what Michael says both about the moral status of embryonic life and also the apparent apathetic response of the pro-life community to the in vitro fertilization procedure that created a collection of unwanted embryos. If you don't think silence has consequences, listen to the argument he makes, arguing that there was not an outcry with in vitro fertilization, or at least not the outcry that he's experienced now with the discussion of embryonic stem cell research. And again, we'll discuss some of that when we get under the stem cell research lessons. Collateral to the in vitro fertilization movement is the practice of extracting a number of ovum from the mother, fertilizing them, implanting some in the womb, and freezing the rest for possible later use, while Michael J. Fox and others like him want unwanted frozen embryos to be dissected for use in research. Another issue has risen in regard to the disposition of unwanted frozen embryos. These embryos are unwanted most often because of divorce, death, or a lost interest in having more children. Who gets the frozen embryos in a divorce or upon the death of a spouse? What happens when a couple does not want more children? The matter came to the attention of the general public for the first time in the divorce case of Mary Sue Davis and Junior Lewis Davis in February 1989. If you follow the link and read the stories, you'll note that in the conflicting rights between the divorced couple, the humanity of the unborn child ultimately was subordinate to the rights of the adults. Surprisingly, in the 1974 hearings on human life amendments before Congress, there was considerable discussion about how birth control functions, especially hormonal birth control and the intrauterine device. I have exhaustively researched birth control for the past decade and remain surprised over how much ignorance there is in the medical community over how hormonal birth control works, not to mention the ignorance among the laity. Numerous times in the hearings there were discussions of how a human life amendment might affect some forms of birth control, like the IUD. What is again interesting to note is that the ends justify the means. Regardless of the personhood status of the embryo, if the birth control prevents birth, it is okay in the eyes of many, even if it prevents implantation of a developing embryo in the uterine lining or dislodges it. Finally, I want you to just do a little, checking out these 3 links, just get a better understanding of what's called the precautionary principle. I provided 3 links to articles on this principle, simply stated, it is the ethical decision to err on the side of caution when we do not know enough about the consequences, the damages, or the hazards that could occur from something. This principle is often invoked in the ecology movement, warning about the unknown and potential dangerous side effects of pollution and chemicals and so forth. As regards the embryo, You would think that any respect for the intrinsic value of human life would have society protecting the embryo on the chance or even on the possibility that it might be fully human and therefore worthy of protection. While as a society we observe this principle to protect our natural resources, you'll see that it is ignored when it comes to embryonic life. And this concludes this third section, is just to give you an overview on it.